The breaking point. The Galactic Federation had stood for 12,000 years. Its crystal spires stretched across the Nexus Prime Station, a monument to peace and cooperation among the stars. 300 species called it home. They traded, they negotiated, they built a civilization that spanned half the known galaxy. But among all these ancient races, one species remained an outsider. Humanity. Commander Sarah Mitchell stood in the observation deck of the UNSS Horizon, watching the massive station grow larger in the viewport. She had made this journey 17 times in the past 5 years. Each time she came with hope. Each time she left with nothing but empty promises and thinly veiled contempt. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. Gray streaks had appeared in her dark hair, lines had deepened around her eyes. She was 42 years old, but she felt much older. Humanity had joined the Federation in 2187, exactly 150 years ago. They had arrived with open hearts and eager minds, ready to learn from species who had mastered space travel before humans had even discovered fire. The welcome had been cold. The ancient races saw humans as children playing with toys they did not understand. Dangerous children who bred too quickly and asked too many questions. The restrictions came immediately. Humans could colonize only 12 systems. Their ships could travel only along designated routes. Their trade was limited to raw materials and basic goods. Every proposal for expansion was denied. Every request for technology sharing was rejected. Every plea for equal treatment was met with the same response. You are too young. Too aggressive. Too unpredictable. Perhaps in another 1,000 years. Sarah had spent her entire career fighting against these barriers. She had negotiated trade deals that benefited both sides. She had mediated disputes between other species, proving human fairness and wisdom. She had followed every rule, met every requirement, and exceeded every expectation. None of it mattered. The Federation would never see humans as equals. Today's meeting was supposed to be different. The Council had finally agreed to discuss the Andromeda Sector Trade Corridor. Human colonies in that region were struggling. They needed access to the main shipping lanes to survive. Sarah had spent 2 years preparing this proposal. She had data, economic projections, and letters of support from 17 different species who traded with human colonies. It was perfect. It was undeniable. The council chamber was vast and ancient. Representatives from dozens of species sat in their designated areas, arranged by age and importance. The eldest races sat closest to the center. The youngest sat at the edges. Humanity's section was so far back that Sarah needed binoculars to see the speakers clearly. She had long since stopped complaining about it. High Chancellor Vornik called the session to order. He was a Zephron, a species of towering reptilian beings who had ruled portions of the galaxy for 8,000 years. His scales were deep purple, a sign of extreme age and status. His voice carried across the chamber without amplification, a deep rumble that made the air itself vibrate. The Council recognizes Commander Sarah Mitchell of Humanity. You may present your proposal. Sarah stood and activated her data display. Holographic charts and graphs appeared above her section, visible to everyone in the chamber. She spoke clearly and calmly, presenting her case with precision. The Andromeda Sector colonies support 4 million human citizens. They produce medical compounds that benefit 37 Federation species. However, current routing restrictions force their cargo ships to travel 3 times the necessary distance. This creates delays, increases costs, and reduces efficiency. We request access to the Andromeda Trade Corridor, which would cut travel time by 60% and increase trade volume for all involved parties. She provided more details, more evidence, more reasons. When she finished, she felt confident. The proposal was solid. The benefits were clear. Surely this time would be different. Chancellor Vornik did not even pause. The proposal is denied. The Andromeda Trade Corridor is reserved for established Federation members. Humanity does not qualify. Sarah felt her heart sink but kept her voice steady. Chancellor, we have been Federation members for 150 years. How much longer must we wait? A Zephron representative named Lord Krenix rose from his seat. His scales were a brighter shade of purple than the Chancellor's, and his eyes glittered with something that looked like amusement. Commander Mitchell, your species has been members for barely a moment in galactic terms. My ancestors were building starships when yours were still living in caves. You must learn patience. Laughter rippled through several sections of the chamber. Sarah felt her face flush with anger but forced it down. She had learned long ago that showing emotion only made things worse. With respect, Lord Krenix, my ancestors' history is irrelevant. What matters is what we have accomplished since joining the Federation. We have met every requirement. We have broken no laws. We have proven ourselves repeatedly. Krenix's smile widened. You have proven that you can follow rules when closely supervised. You have not proven that you can be trusted with freedom. Your species is aggressive by nature. You breed at alarming rates. You expand wherever you are allowed. The restrictions exist to protect the galaxy from your enthusiastic tendencies. More laughter. Sarah looked around the chamber, searching for any friendly faces. A few species looked uncomfortable with the mockery. The Velthans, an insectoid race, seemed sympathetic. The Moriaki, peaceful traders, appeared troubled. But none of them spoke. None of them defended humanity. They never did. The proposal is denied, Chancellor Vornik repeated. This session is concluded. Sarah returned to her ship in silence. Her staff tried to console her, but she waved them away. She had heard it all before. We will try again next year. They cannot ignore us forever. Our time will come. She no longer believed any of it. In her quarters that night, Sarah received an encrypted message from Earth. She read it 3 times, hoping she had misunderstood. She had not. The Zephyron Empire had attacked Colony 7 in the Andromeda sector. The assault had been systematic and brutal. Orbital defense platforms were destroyed in the first strike. The colony itself was bombarded from space. Buildings collapsed. Forests burned. People died by the thousands. When the attack finally ended, 2 million human beings were dead. Another 500,000 were injured. The colony's infrastructure was devastated. The message included footage. Sarah forced herself to watch. She saw cities reduced to rubble. She saw families running through streets as plasma fire rained from above. She saw a school that had taken a direct hit, its walls blown apart, small bodies scattered among the debris. She saw rescue workers pulling survivors from collapsed buildings, their faces blank with shock. The Zephyron Empire claimed the attack was a defensive response to human expansion. They said Colony 7 had violated territorial boundaries. It was a lie. Sarah had the navigation charts. Colony 7 was well within approved human space. The attack was unprovoked, deliberate, and illegal by every Federation law. Sarah immediately filed an emergency complaint with the Federation Council. She demanded justice. She demanded intervention. She demanded that the Zephyron Empire be held accountable for mass murder. The Council's response arrived within hours. The matter falls under regional jurisdiction. The Federation cannot interfere in local disputes. Both parties are encouraged to pursue diplomatic resolution. Sarah read the message in disbelief. A regional dispute. 2 million dead, and the Council called it a regional dispute. She sent another message, this one more urgent. She attached the footage. She provided evidence of the illegal attack. She begged the Council to act. The second response was even shorter. The matter is closed. No further appeals will be considered. That night, Sarah stood alone in the observation deck and looked out at the stars. She thought about all the years she had spent fighting for humanity's place in the galaxy. All the compromises she had made. All the insults she had swallowed. All the time she had told her people to be patient, to have faith, to believe that justice would eventually prevail. She had been wrong. There would be no justice. There would be no acceptance. The Federation did not see humans as potential equals. They saw humans as problems to be contained, threats to be managed, animals to be kept in cages. And when those animals became inconvenient, the Federation allowed them to be slaughtered. Sarah sent one final message to Earth. It was not addressed to the diplomatic corps or the civilian government. It was addressed to Fleet Admiral James Cortez, head of the United Nations Military Command. The message contained only 3 words. Activate Project Nightfall. Within hours, responses came flooding back from Earth. Government officials demanded explanations. Diplomats pleaded for more time. Peace advocates organized protests. But none of it mattered. The decision had been made at the highest levels and it was irreversible. Across human space, sealed orders were opened. Military bases that had operated at minimal capacity suddenly came to life. Factories that had been idle for decades resumed production. Research facilities activated projects that had been on hold for years. Thousands of soldiers received deployment orders. Engineers began assembling weapon systems that had never been tested in combat. Project Nightfall had been conceived 70 years ago, shortly after humanity's first major confrontation with the Federation. A group of military leaders and scientists had gathered in secret to ask a simple question. What if diplomacy fails? What if the Federation never accepts us? What if we are forced to stand alone? The project had been hidden from the galaxy ever since. Hidden from Federation inspectors. Hidden from allied species. Hidden even from most of humanity's own government. Only a handful of people knew the full scope of what had been built in the darkness beyond the outer colonies. Now that darkness was about to be unleashed, Sarah received new orders within 24 hours. She was to recall all human diplomats from Federation space. Every ambassador, every trade representative, every cultural liaison was to return to human territory immediately. No explanations were to be given. No goodbyes were to be said. They were simply to leave. The recall took 3 weeks. Human staff at Federation installations packed their belongings and departed without ceremony. Embassies were closed and locked. Trade offices were emptied. Within a month, not a single human diplomat remained in Federation space. The galaxy noticed. At first there was confusion. Then concern. Intelligence agencies tried to discover what humanity was planning. Spy probes were sent toward human colonies. None returned. Long-range sensors detected strange activity in the outer systems, but the readings made no sense. Massive energy signatures. Unusual radiation patterns. Something was happening in human space, something big. But no one could figure out what. Chancellor Vornik called an emergency session of the Council. Representatives from across the Federation gathered to discuss the human situation. Some were worried. Most were dismissive. They are sulking, Lord Krenix announced confidently. Primitive species always retreat when faced with superior force. They will return eventually, more obedient than before. But as weeks turned to months, humanity did not return. Their colonies went silent. Their ships disappeared from trade routes. Their communication channels went dark. It was as if humanity had simply vanished from the galaxy. In the darkness beyond Pluto, Fleet Admiral James Cortez stood on the bridge of the UNSS Retribution. The ship was 5 kilometers long, bristling with weapons that no Federation species had ever seen. Around it floated 300 more vessels of similar design, the largest military fleet humanity had ever assembled. Cortez was 68 years old. He had spent his entire life preparing for this moment. He had designed the weapons. He had trained the crews. He had planned the strategy. And now, finally, the waiting was over. Status report, he said quietly. All ships ready, Admiral. Crews at battle stations. Stealth systems operational. We are invisible to all Federation sensors. Cortez nodded slowly. He thought about Colony 7. He thought about the 2 million dead. He thought about 150 years of humiliation, restriction, and contempt. He thought about all the times humanity had extended a hand in friendship, only to have it slapped away. No more. Send the message, he ordered. Across human space, the same message was transmitted to every colony, every station, every ship. It was brief and clear. To all human citizens. The age of diplomacy has ended. We will no longer beg for scraps from the Federation table. We will no longer accept their chains. We will no longer tolerate their abuse. Humanity stands alone now. And standing alone, we will show the galaxy what we truly are. The message ended with a date and time. The date when everything would change. The date when humanity would finally stop asking for permission and start taking what they needed. The galaxy had pushed humanity too far. The galaxy had ignored their pleas. The galaxy had allowed them to be slaughtered. Now the galaxy would learn a lesson that species across Earth's history had learned the hard way. Never corner a predator. Never threaten its children. And never, ever mistake patience for weakness. The breaking point had been reached. What came next would reshape the galaxy forever. The reckoning. 6 months of silence. That was all it took for the galaxy to go from dismissive confidence to growing unease. The Federation continued its business as usual, but something felt different. Trade routes that once hummed with human cargo ships now lay empty. Communication channels that had carried human voices fell silent. Even the smallest human outposts had gone dark, their signals vanishing like stars blinking out one by one. Chancellor Vornik convened another council session to discuss the situation. The massive chamber filled with representatives from across the Federation, but the energy was different now. The casual arrogance had faded, replaced by something harder to define. Uncertainty, perhaps. Or the first whispers of fear. The human situation requires our attention, Vornik announced, his deep voice rolling across the chamber. Our intelligence services report unusual activity in human space. We must determine their intentions. Lord Krenix rose from his seat, his purple scales gleaming under the lights. With respect, Chancellor, I believe we are overreacting. The humans are clearly preparing some sort of protest. Perhaps they are building a few warships to make themselves feel important. Let them play their games. When they realize they cannot challenge the Federation, they will come crawling back. Several representatives nodded in agreement. The Thaxians, a species of crystalline beings, chimed their approval. The Korthan, massive bear-like creatures, rumbled their support. These ancient races had seen countless younger species throw tantrums over the centuries. None had ever posed a real threat. But not everyone shared this confidence. Ambassador Lyria of the Velthans stood, her insectoid body clicking softly as she moved. I must disagree, Lord Krenix. I have studied humanity extensively. They are not like other young species. They are patient when they need to be, but they do not forget. They do not forgive. And they do not bluff. This silence troubles me deeply. Krenix waved a clawed hand dismissively. You give them too much credit, Ambassador. They are emotional creatures who act on impulse. This withdrawal is nothing more than a childish reaction to not getting their way. Perhaps, Lyria said quietly. But I would advise caution nonetheless. The Council took no action. No investigation was launched. No outreach was attempted. The Federation simply continued as it always had, secure in its power and certain of its superiority. That certainty lasted exactly 43 more hours. The Zephyron Empire had not been idle during humanity's silence. Emboldened by the Federation's refusal to punish them for the Colony 7 massacre, they had begun planning further expansion into human territory. Lord Krenix himself had authorized the operation. If humans were too weak to defend their colonies, then those colonies were free for the taking. A Zephyron battle group consisting of 30 warships entered the Kepler 442 system, where 3 human mining colonies operated. The colonies were small, with a combined population of only 800,000. They had minimal defenses, just a few orbital platforms with outdated weapons. It would be an easy conquest. The Zephyron fleet commander, Admiral Vector, transmitted the standard ultimatum. Surrender your colonies within 1 hour or face military action. This territory now belongs to the Zephyron Empire by right of superior claim. No response came from the human colonies. The hour passed in silence. Vector gave the order to attack. His ships moved forward in formation, weapons charging, prepared to repeat what they had done at Colony 7. This time would be even easier. The humans had no fleet to defend them. They had abandoned their people. It would be over in minutes. The first Zephyron cruiser exploded without warning. One moment it was advancing toward the nearest colony. The next moment it simply ceased to exist, torn apart by weapons fire that came from nowhere. Vector stared at his screens in shock. His sensors showed nothing. No ships. No energy signatures. Nothing. Evasive maneuvers, he shouted. Find the attackers. A second cruiser exploded. Then a third. His fleet scattered in panic, trying to locate an enemy they could not see. Their sensors swept the system frantically, but found only empty space. Then the empty space began to shimmer. Ships appeared out of nowhere, materializing as if reality itself was tearing open. They were unlike anything Vector had ever seen. Sleek, dark vessels that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. No markings. No identification. But Vector knew exactly what they were. Human ships. Dozens of them. The battle, if it could even be called that, lasted 17 minutes. The human vessels moved with impossible speed and precision. Their weapons tore through Zephyron shields as if they were paper. Their stealth technology made them vanish and reappear at will. Vector's ships tried to fight back, but their targeting systems could not lock on. Their weapons found only empty space. One by one the Zephyron warships fell. Vector watched his fleet die around him, powerless to stop it. When only his flagship remained, the human ships formed a circle around him. They did not fire. They simply waited. A communication channel opened. The voice that came through was calm, almost gentle. It belonged to Fleet Admiral James Cortez. Admiral Vector. You have 2 choices. You can transmit everything you have witnessed here to your empire and to the Federation Council. Or you can die with your crew and your ship. Choose now. Vector's hands trembled as he activated his ship's recording systems. He transmitted everything. The ambush. The one-sided slaughter. The technology that should not exist. When the transmission was complete, the human ships simply vanished, leaving his damaged flagship alone in the debris field. The recording reached the Zephyron homeworld within hours. It reached the Federation Council within a day. The reaction was immediate and explosive. Emergency sessions were called. Military commanders analyzed the footage frame by frame. Scientists studied the weapon signatures and energy readings. The conclusions they reached were all the same and all terrifying. Humanity had made impossible leaps in technology. Their stealth systems were generations ahead of anything the Federation possessed. Their weapons operated on principles that Federation scientists barely understood. Their ships moved faster and maneuvered better than should be physically possible. Oh, that was the question everyone asked. How had a species restricted to basic technology suddenly developed weapons that could crush the Zephyron fleet without taking a single loss? The answer came from unlikely source. Dr. Theron, a Velthan scientist who had worked alongside human researchers years ago. He presented his findings to the Council in a voice heavy with regret. "We underestimated them," he said simply. "We assumed that because we restricted their access to advanced technology, they could not develop it themselves. We were wrong. Humans do not think like we do. When we face a barrier, we accept it and work within the limitations. When humans face a barrier, they find a way around it, over it, or through it. They do not accept limitations." He displayed data showing human scientific publications over the past 70 years. The patterns were clear once you knew to look for them. Human researchers had been quietly developing new theories, new materials, and new methods. They had not asked for Federation help. They had not requested technology transfers. They had simply done the work themselves. And they had succeeded where species 10 times older had failed. The council chamber erupted in arguments. Some demanded immediate military action. Others called for renewed diplomatic contact. A few, like Ambassador Lyria, suggested that perhaps it was time to reconsider humanity's place in the Federation. Lord Krenix would hear none of it. He stood and roared his response, his voice shaking with rage. "We cannot show weakness. The humans have attacked a Federation member without provocation. They must be punished, or every young species in the galaxy will think they can challenge us. I propose immediate military action. Send our combined fleets to human space and end this rebellion before it spreads." The vote was close, but Krenix's faction won. The Federation began assembling the largest military fleet in its history. Ships from 20 different species gathered at Nexus Prime, preparing to teach humanity a lesson it would never forget. But while the Federation prepared its Grand Armada, humanity was already moving. The strikes came simultaneously across 30 different systems. Human ships appeared without warning at Zephyron military installations, shipyards, and supply depots. The pattern was always the same. They materialized from stealth, destroyed their targets with precision, and vanished before reinforcements could arrive. No civilians were harmed. No colonies were attacked. Only military targets. The Zephyron Empire tried to respond, but their fleets could not catch an enemy they could not see. Their defenses were designed to stop conventional attacks, not ships that could appear and disappear at will. Within 3 weeks, their military capability had been reduced by 60%. The message was clear. Humanity could strike anywhere, anytime, and there was nothing the Zephyron Empire could do to stop them. Chancellor Vornik called yet another emergency session. This time there was no laughter, no dismissive comments, no casual arrogance. The representatives sat in tense silence as the reports came in. System after system. Installation after installation. All destroyed with surgical precision. "They are crippling the Zephyron military," Vornik said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "And they are doing it with impunity." Lord Krenix stood to speak, but for the first time his confidence had cracked. "We need more time to adapt our defenses. Once we understand their technology." "We do not have time," interrupted Admiral Lyria. "Do you not understand? Humanity spent 150 years studying us, learning our tactics, analyzing our weaknesses. They know everything about us. We know almost nothing about them. This war was over before it began. Then what do you propose?" Krenix snapped. "Should we surrender to these primitives?" "I propose we acknowledge the truth," Lyria said quietly. "They are not primitives. They never were. We called them that because it made us feel superior, because it justified our treatment of them. But we were wrong." The chamber fell silent. No one wanted to admit what they all knew. The humans had played a game that lasted 150 years. They had pretended to be weak, restricted, and controllable, all while building weapons in secret. All while preparing for the day when patience ran out. A new transmission arrived from human space. It was broadcast on all frequencies, ensuring everyone in the galaxy would see it. Fleet Admiral Cortez appeared on every screen, his weathered face calm and his voice steady. "To the Galactic Federation. For 150 years we sought peace. We followed your laws. We accepted your restrictions. We believed that reason and goodness would eventually prevail. We were wrong. You did not see us as potential allies. You saw us as threats to be contained. And when we tried to live peacefully within the chains you placed on us, you allowed our people to be slaughtered. Cortez paused, letting his words sink in. Behind him, the vast human fleet could be seen, hundreds of ships floating in perfect formation. We did not want this war. We wanted cooperation, trade, and friendship. You gave us contempt, restrictions, and death. So we adapted. We built in secret what you refused to share. We developed weapons you said we were too primitive to understand. And now we stand before you, no longer asking for our rights but taking them. Another pause. When Cortez spoke again, his voice was colder. Here are our terms. The Zephyron Empire will withdraw from all human systems immediately. They will pay reparations for the 2 million dead at Colony 7. They will stand trial for war crimes. The Federation will recognize humanity's right to unrestricted expansion, trade, and self-determination. You have 72 hours to comply. The transmission ended. The council chamber erupted in chaos. Dozens of representatives shouted at once. Some demanded defiance. Others urged compliance. The Federation had never been given an ultimatum by a junior member. The very idea was unthinkable. But what choice did they have? The Federation's Grand Armada was still assembling. It would take weeks to be ready for deployment. The humans could strike 100 more targets in that time. And even when the Armada was ready, could it defeat an enemy that could not be seen until they chose to reveal themselves? Chancellor Vornik made the hardest decision of his long life. He authorized negotiations. The talks took place on a neutral station, far from both Federation and human space. Commander Sarah Mitchell represented humanity. She walked into the negotiation room with her head high, remembering all the years she had sat in that tiny section at the back of the council chamber. All the time she had been mocked and dismissed. Those days were over. The negotiations lasted 2 weeks. The Federation tried to salvage what it could, but humanity held all the advantages. In the end, the terms were almost exactly what Cortez had demanded. The Zephyron Empire would withdraw and pay reparations. Lord Krenix himself would stand trial for authorizing the Colony 7 massacre. Humanity would have unrestricted rights to expansion and trade. But the most important change was simpler and more profound. Humanity would no longer sit at the back of the council chamber. They would sit with the elder races, recognized as equals. The treaty was signed on the 150th anniversary of humanity's admission to the Federation. Sarah Mitchell placed her signature on the document and felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It had taken a war. It had taken the threat of even greater violence. But finally, humanity had won what they should have been given from the beginning: respect. The galaxy learned its lesson, though the price had been steep. The Zephyron Empire was crippled militarily and humiliated politically. The Federation's authority was diminished. And everyone now knew that humanity was not to be underestimated. But more than that, the galaxy learned something about persistence. About patience that was not weakness. About a species that could wait for 150 years, absorbing insults and restrictions, all while preparing for the day when waiting would no longer be enough. The humans had a saying, Ambassador Lyria once told the council. Speak softly and carry a big stick. We heard them speak softly for so long that we forgot to notice the stick they were building. In human space, celebrations erupted across every colony. People gathered in the streets, crying and laughing and embracing. The dead of Colony 7 were honored with ceremonies that lasted for days. Monuments were built. Names were carved in stone. The price of freedom had been paid in blood, and humanity would never forget. Fleet Admiral Cortez stood on the bridge of the Retribution and looked out at the stars. They had won, but he took no joy in it. War, even a short one, was never something to celebrate. He thought about all the Zephyron soldiers who had died. Most of them were probably just following orders, just doing their duty. But he also thought about the children of Colony 7. The schools that had been bombed. The families that had burned. And he knew that what humanity had done was necessary. Evil unchallenged is evil empowered. Injustice ignored is injustice accepted. The galaxy had crossed a line. Humanity had drawn a new one. And now, finally, the galaxy understood where it was. Years would pass. The Federation would adapt to its new reality. Trade between humans and other species would flourish. Diplomatic relations would improve. Some species would even become genuine friends with humanity, building the kind of partnerships humans had always wanted. But no one would ever again make the mistake of seeing humanity as weak. No one would again assume that patience meant submission. And no one would again think that restrictions and contempt could keep humans contained. The age of humanity had begun not with a welcome, but with a reckoning. The galaxy had pushed them too far, ignored their pleas and allowed them to suffer. The price for that mistake had been paid in shattered fleets and broken pride. And somewhere in the darkness of space, human shipyards continued their work. Because humanity had learned another lesson during those 150 years. Trust could be earned. Peace could be built. But safety required strength. The galaxy had finally learned to respect humanity. But respect maintained through fear alone was fragile. The real work of building trust would take generations. For now, though, humanity stood among the stars as equals. They had earned their place not through permission granted, but through power demonstrated. The galaxy had crossed the line. Humanity had snapped back. And the price had been paid by everyone. But from that pain, perhaps something better could grow. That was the hope, at least. And hope, after all, was what had kept humanity going for 150 years. Hope tempered by strength. Hope backed by the will to fight when fighting became necessary. The galaxy would remember this lesson. And humanity would never again allow themselves to be pushed to the breaking point. The age of silence was over. The age of equals had begun.